It is your prisonplanet.tv memberships that fund so much of what we do here on this operation. And then we're more than happy for the TV show after it's aired live, then be leaked out onto the web to tens of millions of people. That's our goal.
Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex, and we've got an interesting show lined up today. And we've got some breaking news. It seems like every time I come in here to substitute for Alex Jones, we've got some breaking drone news, and that's going on right now. We've got a drone, an Air Force drone, that has crashed close to a remote Florida highway. It's shut down that highway. We've got a little bit of video here for that. If you guys can pull it up and the people who are watching it can see, it's quite a bit of smoke going on there. Last time I was here, we had an E-6B that was flying loops through Austin. There's pictures, if you're watching, of the drone that went down. And it's quite a bit of smoke, and it was fairly close to a population center. It says, according to an Air Force fact sheet, the QF-4 is tested at nearby Tyndall Air Force Base and at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. The plane is a modified F-4 Phantom aircraft. They say it's been used since the 1950s. Now, the last time I was here, Alex called in, was absolutely amazed at the size of this airplane that was flying looping circles around the city of Austin, flying at the level of the buildings, very dangerously low. We eventually learned that it was an E-6B that was doing, as I reported, a training exercise in Austin. And you have to wonder, if they're doing training, why are they doing training so close to population centers? Well, they're doing that all the time. Actually, we've got numerous incidents of SWAT teams, not SWAT teams, but military exercises in conjunction with our militarized police, with our SWAT teams. They're working together in city after city doing these drills and arresting citizens who videotape them. We've had reports of that, and we've shown video of a citizen getting arrested for exercising his freedom to videotape what's going on in public. And they told him, you have to leave, you're in a dangerous area. And it's like, well, if it's a dangerous area, it's because you're landing helicopters here in a public space, and they haven't warned anybody, they didn't cordon it off, and you have to ask yourself why they're doing it. Well, they've answered that question. We've had videotape of a military officer explaining that you train where you expect to be deployed. So if you expect that you're going to invade a mountainous area, or you expect you're going to invade a beach, you train there. If you expect you're going to invade American cities, that's where you train, and you train with the police. And that brings us to an article right now that we've got linked on the Drudge Report. This is on Infowars.com. This is from former President Jimmy Carter. And he said, in the wake of the NSA spying scandal, he said of the American political system, America has no functioning democracy. That's Jimmy Carter. America has no functioning democracy. Now, he joins Paul Craig Roberts, and he joins retired Senator Gordon Humphrey in criticizing what's going on in America right now. Think about this. This is just one generation removed. These are people who have retired a few years ago, still alive, criticizing how far we have gone into despotism. And another article that's on Infowars.com, we have this from Paul Craig Roberts, and he calls it coup d'etat. He said, Americans are ruled by usurpers who claim that the executive branch is above the law, that the U.S. Constitution is merely a scrap of paper. And he points out an unconstitutional government is an illegitimate government. Says Americans are oppressed by illegitimate government rulings, not by law or by the Constitution, and they, by laws and naked force is how they rule. And he doesn't mince any words. He says the South African apartheid regime was more legitimate than the regime in Washington. The apartheid Israeli regime in Palestine is more legitimate. The Taliban, more legitimate. Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, more legitimate. Absolutely true. If you don't follow the Constitution that you swear allegiance to, you become merely dictators. We're going to be talking about that, and we've got some guests coming up that are going to talk about some local solutions to this tyranny coming out of Washington. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex. And just before we went to the break, we were talking about just the former generation of leaders in this country talking about how illegitimate our government is. I mean, these are former senators, former presidents. Paul Craig Roberts, who is the father of Reaganomics, former head of policy at the Department of Treasury. They're all pointing out that we have basically had the federal government cut itself loose from the chains that bind them down. They've cut themselves loose from the document that they swear allegiance to. Understand that when they take office, the oath to the Constitution is essentially an oath to a superior power, to the law. The law is king, lex rex. What they're doing is swearing allegiance to a king and then ignoring and subverting that king. Now, we've got an article that's linked on Drudge Report from Jimmy Carter, where he says, basically, America has no functioning democracy. And as I mentioned just before the break, Paul Craig Roberts said, the American government is an unconstitutional government and an illegitimate government because they no longer pay any attention to the Constitution. Now, also breaking yesterday from The Guardian, there was an email exchange between Ed Snowden and former GOP Senator Gordon Humphrey. And he said, I believe you have done the right thing in exposing what I regard to be a massive violation of the U.S. Constitution. And so when they got this message, Glenn Greenwald contacted the former senator just to make sure that it was not a prank, that it was actually there. And what he did was he essentially clarified it and doubled down. This is what he said in the follow-up message. He said, this is a senator, former senator, writing to Glenn Greenwald. And he says, yes, it was I who sent the email message to Ed Snowden, thanking him for exposing astonishing violations of the U.S. Constitution and encouraging him to persevere in the search for asylum. He talked about him being a courageous whistleblower. And he said that no effort, he's very concerned that there is no effort being made to identify and to remove from office and bring to justice officials who have abused power seriously and repeatedly violated the Constitution of the United States and the rights of millions of unsuspecting citizens. And that's the whole point. All you see discussed on the talk show hosts are, how do we keep this from happening again? Andrea Mitchell was interviewing a Democrat from, I think it was Montana, and they were talking about how they could vet security clearances better so this doesn't happen again. Nothing at all about making the government obey the Constitution. Where are we headed with this? Well, actually, James Madison pointed out, and we read this quote last night in the nightly news, he pointed out a long time ago what was going to happen if we didn't follow the Constitution anymore, and if we didn't understand the traditions that led to the writing of that document. He says, do not separate text, that would be the text of the Constitution, from historical background. If you do, you will have perverted and subverted the Constitution, which can only end in a distorted, bastardized form of illegitimate government. Same words being used by the previous generation of politicians who have, and government officials at the federal level. Now, in the second hour, we're going to be talking to Stan Lenic, and if you remember, he was the deputy. You might remember this when we had the opt-out and film campaign with Ashley, Jessica, and Jason Burmis. They went to a New York airport, and they were handing out literature, not bothering anybody, and they had the police called on them. And fortunately, the deputy sheriff who showed up was Stan Lenic. There's a little video of that. We're going to be talking to him. He stood up for their constitutional rights. He refused to bully them because this fellow with the airport and the fellow who was trying to get the police to bully them should have known better. He was formerly somebody who worked in the media. Now, that's Stan Lenic that we're going to be talking to, and he was Deputy Sheriff of the Year by the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. So we're going to talk to him because, you know, we need to have people who have legitimate authority. People who have legitimate authority are people who put themselves under the Constitution, like Deputy Lenic did. So we want to talk to him, and in the third hour, we're going to be talking to Kirsten Tynan, and she's with the Fully Informed Jury Association, because that is where you come in. That's where every one of you can come in, because you can stand in the gap against bad laws, against oppressive government. You can stand in the gap and make sure that your fellow citizen gets justice and that unjust laws are not enforced. And that's a very important thing. Most people don't understand where that power comes from. They don't understand the tradition of that. They don't understand the judges will basically tell juries lies. They will suppress information about what the rights and the duties of the jury truly are. But let's think about where this is really headed. Let's look at somebody who actually lived under the Stasi. There was an amazing article that was translated into English, and I tried to get this guy to come on so we could interview him, but unfortunately he doesn't speak English. This is a pastor who lived under the Stasi in East Germany, and he has something that all Americans should really think about. He talked about living there for most of his life up until about 20 years ago when it fell. He says, we all recall the fall of 1989 when thousands of people all over German Democratic Republic marched from churches to streets and squares. Now, this fellow was a pastor. And one of the things that he had done, and he was surprised to find that the Stasi didn't know anything about it, he actually had smuggled in from the West a miniature lab, and he was doing testing of the water because he knew they were putting chemicals into it. Not openly like our government puts fluoride and other things that we know are harmful, things that are banned in Europe. They were putting other chemicals in as well as that into the water, and he was doing testing and giving information out about that. And they didn't know about that, but they pretty much knew about everything else. And one of the things to remember is that it was the clergy who were instrumental in getting people their freedom in East Germany, just like they were very instrumental in giving people their freedom here in America. They called them the Black Regiment during the Revolutionary War. And what happened in East Germany was that the pastors organized people in the churches, and the churches marched en masse to the wall, to the spots where they would shoot people if they got too close. And the soldiers finally refused to fire. And it was that kind of a peaceful stand down en masse that essentially brought down the fall of the Stasi and the East German government. But I want you to think about what it's like to live under the Stasi. And this is what he tells us. He said, how did a state keep this population of 17 million in check for 40 years? The answer, through surveillance, incarceration, and terror. The wheels of terror were implanted in every brain. The moment a critical thought took shape, the wheels of terror started turning. Who would be able to hear this and make note of it? Which file would it land in? What could be the consequences? What reprisals would be taken? Could there be an impact on the children's schooling, on their apprenticeship position, or their college placement? Even preschoolers and kindergartners had internalized that. And he said the guarantor for terror and order was the Stasi, state security. They called it in German, eavesdrop and peek. Now that's what our government is doing to us today. And I find it so disturbing that Americans can come out and say, I don't care. They can look, I don't have anything to hide. Well, the people in East Germany didn't have anything to hide either, but nothing was able to be hidden. And listen to what happens when you know you're being watched. Hardly anything went undetected. Like a fungus, surveillance permeated all of social life in the, quote, service of socialism to protect the country from the imperialistic class enemy. See, they had a different enemy. It's always necessary to have an enemy. Our enemy, of course, is now Al-Qaeda. Used to be the communists when that was no longer a credible threat. Now they're holding up these boogeymen in caves. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But he says, during demonstrations, and this is how pervasive the threat of the Stasi was, that even when they started to have demonstrations that led up to the fall of the government in 1989, he said a huge crowd of people marched through downtown Eisenach in the state of Thuringia, where I live, chanting. But the moment the train of protesters passed the headquarters of the Stasi, they fell silent. Nobody shouted anything. So here you got a crowd of people who are in defiance of this communist regime and demonstrating, but they are afraid of the Stasi because the Stasi knows everything about them, records everything about them, uses that to control their lives, to control their futures. That's what total information awareness is about. It's a means of control. It's a means, and that's what surveillance leads to. People need to understand this. He says, listen to this. The Stasi not only surveyed the everyday life of citizens, but also influenced our lives. In my case, the Stasi sought to document my underground political activities with the goal of gathering enough material to take me to court. But they didn't wish to wait until I'd made a mistake worthy of prosecution. Instead, they used snitches to plant rumors in my parish and to strip me of the backing of my superiors in the church. They even tried to set up an informer on my wife to destroy our marriage. Snitches provoked me, engaged me in topical conversations, intercepted letters, intercepted personal contacts, indirectly influencing and manipulating my life. And he goes on to say that whenever they would have a meeting, whenever the church would get together, any function, they always knew that there were Stasi members, Stasi informers that were present. Then he said they would even cynically extend a welcome to those who, quote, had to be here professionally, unquote. So they knew, and he said he never said anything at a meeting that he wasn't willing to go to jail for. Is that the way you want to live? Because what we're going to see in America is something far more pervasive, something far more dangerous than anything that ever happened with the Stasi. You can see pictures of rooms full of files, paper files on people. They had no way to data mine most of that. They collected so much information on people that they really couldn't put it all together. But we now have this massive data center that's being built in Utah that is going to use enough water. It's so massive, so incredibly massive, so much data storage, so much heat being generated that they're going to use enough water that they could supply thousands of homes. And that's a big issue out in Utah. But that's where we're headed. We're headed for a complete and total surveillance state. We're headed for something that is far worse than the Stasi ever did, something that is far worse than George Orwell ever imagined in 1984. And the American public just shrugs, many of them. Those of us who are aware have to wake up the others to the dangers that are coming. And we're going to be talking more about that in just a few minutes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex today, and we were just talking before the break about the Stasi, life under the Stasi, and a lot of information is coming out about that right now. People are very sensitive about that, especially in Germany, because it's come out that we were conducting massive spying on Germany as well. And they don't like to be spied on because they have this tradition of the Gestapo and the Stasi. And as one person wrote in the Financial Times, her name was Constance Stellensmuller, she wrote, our grandparents' generation feared the early morning knock on the door of the Gestapo. Well, you know what? At least the Gestapo knocked. That's not the case with the American Gestapo, the SWAT teams, right? I guess we should call them the SWAT teams because it sounds a bit more German. They just bust the door down. They throw in grenades, flash stun grenades, and they shoot anybody who doesn't understand that they're the police. If somebody kicks in your door in the middle of the night, your first reaction is going to be to take defensive action, to grab a gun or something. They kill people over and over again for that. But that's become standard operating procedure now. She said that it was only after the fall of the wall in 1989 that people really understood how much terror was being perpetrated on them. People in America still don't understand that. And one of the things she mentioned about this was that in Germany, she said, we have a better reason to fear the secret state than most people. She said they don't like closed-circuit television cameras. We're perfectly comfortable with them in America because we don't understand how they're being used. It's also why our constitutional court enshrined a fundamental right of data privacy and declared it illegal for Germany to implement an EU directive on preventative data storage. If you remember that comedy video, Alex talked to the fellow who did it. I don't recall his name right now, but he was following people. He was a comedian. He was following people around in public places. He had a big boom mic, and he had some fake earbuds on. Tom Mabe, thank you. And he had some fake earbuds on, and he's dressed with sunglasses and a suit like a CIA agent. And he puts this microphone in people's faces, and they're like, hey, get out of here. When you understand the surveillance, it's very abhorrent. And it was abhorrent to the people in Germany because they understood it was being done by people. When it's completely automated, when it is completely transparent, you don't notice the surveillance, you don't notice the cameras, people don't object to it. And that's the very dangerous situation. Even things like free speech. And this is an article on InfoWars. A poll says 34% of Americans say the First Amendment is too extreme. That's right. we don't need our First Amendment freedom. I mean, why would you not want to have freedom of speech? I mean, that's the most amazing thing to me. I mean, that's not anything that, how could you make a case against freedom of speech? I mean, people have been totally brainwashed by the state media, the state-controlled mainstream media, to think that they have to give up everything for their freedom. But you know, the opposite of liberty is not security, it's slavery. And liberty and security go together. You can't have one without the other. As Thomas Jefferson said about life and liberty, he said the hand of force can destroy them, but cannot disjoin them. That's the same thing with liberty and security. You know, you can have a government that destroys both your liberty and your security, but you can't have one without the other. Now, the interesting thing about this is a survey that was conducted by the Newseum. That's a news museum. And they do an annual survey about people's attitude toward the First Amendment. And what they found was that it was up from 13% who really didn't think that that we should have free press or free speech. It jumped from 13% to 34%. So more than a third of the people don't think we should have a free press or free speech or freedom of religion. And it extends to other things as well, as we've said all along about this fight for the Second Amendment. If people don't respect the Second Amendment, they're not going to respect any of the other freedoms either, the government. If they don't respect that, they're not going to respect the others. And interestingly enough, only 4% of the people valued the Second Amendment. So they don't really understand their freedoms. You know, they don't understand what they're about to lose. Now, we've got this contest that we're going through feverishly trying to come up with a finalist and look at all these different films and give them a fair viewing, multiple viewings. One of the ones that I saw just recently was a film called A Dream Revered. And you can see these films at Infowars.com/Paul Revere. Or just /P, I think, takes you there as well. Now, in this particular film, what got me about it was that it starts with the person's personal recollection about how his jobs have gone. They've left this country. They've gone to other countries. He worked in Detroit, and he's driving through Detroit and saying, "This is your future, America." And we're going to be talking about that right after we come back. He talks about how the jobs have gone. He talks about the great sucking sound that Ross Perot warned us about. And he talks about what's being put in its place. And we'll talk about that right after we return. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex. And I am joined here for the next half hour with Jakari Jackson is coming in. We're going to talk a little bit about the news. I've been on my soapbox here about the police state and how America is turning into the Stasi. Actually, there was, on the 4th of July weekend, there was an artist, a light artist in Berlin that actually shown this giant, projected a giant sign on the side of the U.S. Embassy that said United Stasi of America and had a picture of Kim.com. And they know what the Stasi is about, and they see this happening, Jakari. I tell you what, they're really worried about it.
Charge him with something, correct?
Yeah, they're trying to think of something to charge him with. I don't know.
I mean, that's not even graffiti. I mean,
that's right.
Shining that image.
That's right. But I don't know, maybe... definition of character, I mean.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
Also, last night we had, Jakari and I normally do the nightly news, and we had the world premiere last night of State of Mind. Now, this is you want to talk about how the government controls us. There was an article today about a guy, a real-life Jason Bourne, that was from Natural News, where the guy has no memory and he's speaking Swedish. That's the kind of mind control we typically think of, the kind of MK Ultra type of stuff. But this is actually covers that, as well as covers the broader aspects of mind control.
Propaganda.
Yeah, the more subtle aspects of it. Education, the educational system, and what the goals have been from the very beginning. Now, we premiered this last night. We had the world premiere of State of Mind last night on the InfoWars Nightly News for our subscribers to Prison Planet TV. But, you can still get a copy of it. And where we were back in North Carolina, we didn't have the bandwidth to watch movies on the internet. A lot of people don't like to stream an entire movie on the internet. And if you get a DVD of this, that's a great way to pass the information along to other people. People are much more likely to watch this and enjoy it with a DVD. Everybody's got a DVD player.
On Blu-ray.
That's right. Blu-ray, even. So, Jakari, what's up?
Well, I saw this, and you brought this up when I first walked in, the McDonald's budget.
Yeah.
Now, maybe we can get a doc cam on this. This is the McDonald's budget, as you would assume by the title. It's trying to teach people who make the McDonald's type of income how to budget their money. And this article points out that, it would ask the question, can you support a family on $2,000 a month? Now, supporting myself on $2,000 a month is, difficult enough. To pay
the entire family
between rent and various utilities, over $700 a month. Then food, gas, just the bare necessities, phone, and so forth. And it says McDonald's teamed up with Visa to teach their employees, how to properly budget their minimum wage. But the big thing in it, it says blatantly in the document itself that they expect you to work 2 jobs.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're not going to hire you full time, because then they got to pay Obamacare.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going to make, to get even like a $20,000 income, they're going to make you work 2 jobs.
Exactly. So you're going to work, maybe 2 30-hour jobs, I guess.
I don't know.
60 hours.
But they don't budget anything for food or for gas. I guess it's like, do you want fries with that budget? I mean,
it's pretty ridiculous. It's just more of this trying to get people to live on less. Meanwhile, Obama's going to Africa saying that Africans shouldn't have air conditioning. I'm not making that up. We played that clip here before. Saying,
Prince Charles has said the same thing. They fly in with their jets and say, you shouldn't drive cars.
Yeah, he hops off
jets everywhere.
Obama jumps off Air Force One and tells people they shouldn't have cars in Africa because that'll raise the standard of living too high.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Meanwhile, he's renting out, private golf courses to play with Tiger Woods and so forth.
It's going to melt down the entire planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. They put the employees at McDonald's on this ridiculous budget that doesn't even allocate any money for food or for gas to get to your 2 jobs that you're going to have.
Right.
Okay, but meanwhile, our government has supposedly this debt limit of $16 trillion, just under $16 trillion.
Frozen.
That's been frozen for the last 56 days. They're incredibly claiming that they have not spent any money for the last 56 straight days. So evidently nobody in the federal government is getting paid anything. They're not buying anything. And they stopped at about $26 million short of the limit. And it's been frozen there since May 17th,
Yeah, just like you said, nobody's gotten a paycheck. They haven't had another $7 million vacation or, whatever else their expenses may incur.
Yeah, I guess they put Obama's trips on a credit card or something.
But you
maybe
remember,
Visa.
Obama keeps threatening, and I believe it was last year, the year before, he threatened not to pay the military. Of all people. People who go overseas and have to send money back to their families, we're not going to pay them, or he threatened not to pay them.
Absolutely. We've got an interesting article. We're talking about how the government scares everybody into all of these different programs. We've got to spy on you. We've got to go through your cars. There's an article on the Drudge Report today that TSA is now going through parked cars at airports, right? Yeah. You've got to be so afraid of Al-Qaeda. And we've got a clip here that has Fox News talking about Al-Qaeda hijacking your car. Can we play that, guys? Can we play a little bit of that? Go ahead.
Imagine this scenario. You're driving along and suddenly you're no longer controlling the car. That's a scary scenario from some top security analysts who warn that as our cars become more sophisticated, they also become more vulnerable to hackers and even terrorists. Is that true? Morgan Wright is a cyber terrorism analyst and is joining us now. And again, one of our favorite stories, but one that really concerned us, Morgan. Is this true? I mean, is this something that we need to be concerned about?
Well, look, so the fact and fiction. In fact, yes, you can take control of a car. OnStar is an example, and they work with law enforcement. The stolen vehicle assist.
Just last week
they can actually locate your car. Law enforcement gets in behind it. They send a signal to the car to start slowing it down, and then it cruises off to the side of the road. But in that scenario, law enforcement's in control. They block the road. My concern is what happens when they not only just maybe hack the car, they hack the systems that control these cars or have access to them, and then do these things. So a lot of people say that's far-fetched, but one of my examples on September 10th, 2001, we thought it was far-fetched to fly 4 airplanes into a building. Never thought it could happen.
Put it right there.
Never say never.
Yeah, they thought it was far-fetched to fly 4 airplanes into buildings. Actually, they got 2 airplanes flew into the Twin Towers, and 3 giant skyscrapers fell straight down.
Exactly.
Like controlled demolition.
And
so, I mean, yeah, I think it is incredible because they don't even know how many planes flew into, because, you know, obviously you would think that they would take a plane to make a building fall down or more than that.
Yeah.
Because they designed them to to withstand a direct plane hit.
You know, since let's briefly talk about the topic. Building 7, 9/11, had very little exterior damage, you know, a little bit of debris.
Some minor fires.
And supposedly knocked the building down. But you think about buildings 4 and 5 that had much more damage and had to be torn down to the ground. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah, that's incredible. But yeah, he talks about how it's just so incredible. But the other thing I want to talk about here is notice how they craft the discussion here. You know, now it's hackers and it's Al-Qaeda who could hack into your car. But when the government does it, it's for your own safety.
When Officer Brown pulls you over on
when the reality is
stretch of highway,
exactly,
it's all good.
Yeah, only the government is going to be doing this. You know, when this thing came out with Hastings, right? Immediately, Alex said, you know, they can crash a car by hacking into the system. And, oh no, you can't do that. That's far-fetched.
I want people to see this. Can you guys just go to Google? You don't have to play the audio, but just go type in Google car, and it's some trendy guy with a hat on. He's driving to
exactly.
Taco Bell.
Exactly. And you know, but after that came out, after Alex said it, people were laughing at him. But then when Richard Clark, who is the former U.S. National Coordinator for Security, Infrastructure Protection, and Counterterrorism, Richard Clark, tells the Huffington Post, there's reason to believe that intelligence agencies for major powers know how to remotely seize control of a car. And he says, so if there were a cyber attack on Hastings' car, and I'm not saying there was, I think whoever did it would probably get away with it. And then later on in that article, they even say, then just a couple of paragraphs down, they say Hastings was driving this Mercedes when he crashed into a tree. I mean, first of all, if you remember, the only eyewitness that everybody was talking about the first day was Luis Cortez. And what he said was it was driving very fast, it jackknifed, parts went everywhere, okay? He didn't say that it hit the tree and caught fire that way, okay? And if you look at the way the car... If you look at how the car is, okay, and where the engine is, all right, there's absolutely no way that those two are going to get separated with that kind of crash. If it hit head-on into the tree, it's going to capture the engine and drive it into the car.
Exactly.
If it hit sideways with enough impact to somehow, I mean, anything I guess could be possible, but if it was going to eject it sideways at a right angle to the direction the car was going, that car would have been wrapped around the tree. That didn't happen either. But I've looked at crash after crash after crash on the internet. And the simple fact of the matter is, if you got something like a Pinto, remember the Ford Pinto? Maybe you don't remember that. I do. I'm old enough to remember it. Okay, it was a big deal because its fuel tank was compromised in rear-end collisions, and you can see highway traffic cameras of it being hit from the back, and the entire contents of the gas can are atomized and sprayed everywhere, and then catch fire. And you see that in these car crashes. You see car crash after car crash, very, very bad. They don't blow up instantly like they do on a Hollywood movie.
Exactly. Yeah.
That only happens when you have the rear end is hit. And, of course, the rear end of the Mercedes that Michael Hastings was driving was completely intact. So there's no way that's going to blow up and explode on impact. It's less than a 2% chance that somebody's going to die in an automobile fire because that is so rare that happens.
Right.
Because typically it starts to catch fire and it gradually builds.
Yeah, even if you watch NASCAR races, those guys usually have time to bail out before the car goes up in flames, if it does go up in flames.
A very good example, there's a video, people can see it on YouTube. It was like a Formula One race, and this one car loses control. Maybe it's like a greasy spot on the track or something. Goes spinning out of control, crashes, parts go flying everywhere, but doesn't catch on fire. Short while later, another car hits the same spot, same thing, starts spinning out, and hits this car in the back. Instantly, a giant fireball, okay, because he hit it in the back and exploded the gas tank. Now, of course, that guy actually walked out of that giant fireball because he had a fireproof suit, had a helmet, that sort of thing, which a person typically would not have. But the point being is that the government can hack into these systems. Mercedes has been maniacal about trying to make their cars safer. They developed anti-lock braking systems. They developed these stability counter-steering systems. And they have all kinds of systems that can accelerate and slow down your car now based on if it sees that you're going to be hitting somebody head-on. And even takes a look at people behind you to see how quickly to put the brakes on. So they have all kinds of controls on these cars, which make them safer, but also makes them hackable. We've had video that we played on the show of a DARPA official talking about how severe a problem that is for the government. They're worried about it.
Oh yeah, because all it is hacking. They hack drones. I believe it was the University of Texas hacked one right here, and so people think that it's impossible. It's something that can happen. If you have an older car, you may not have to worry about such things. But people who drive the newer models, it is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at this situation with the Hastings car, now I believe it was a bomb that went up, would cause the pieces to fly everywhere, because there was one eyewitness that was interviewed by the Young Turks, and I didn't find him to be very credible, because it seemed like he was trying to reinforce the official story, and he says, oh yeah, it hit this bump, and I think that's what caused the engine to come out. It's like, I'm sorry, but whatever you want to say about cars, especially Mercedes, they're not going to have the engine fall out when it hits a bump. Okay, these are cars that they designed to drive on the Autobahn with no speed limit, and they do it all the time.
Right.
And a high speed dip in the pavement is not going to cause the engine to come out and exactly to go a different direction. So it's just not credible. But it would give them a cover story, as everybody has picked up, as the mainstream media has picked up, to have him driving at a high speed under hacking control and then blow the car up. I mean, that would perfectly fit.
Yeah, and that's what they want. They don't want anybody to question the story. We've given you this story. We came out, we said there's no foul play. We don't want to release the police documents and so forth. Just let it go. And that's pretty much what they want us to do with the associates, the Zokar brothers. Not saying they're innocent or guilty, but it's this repetitive thing that they just give you more information all the time, so you forget about this. I'm still waiting to see the surveillance footage from Sandy Hook.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They never show that. Now, you mentioned the Zokar trial, and one of the things I think is interesting. Pull up that photo, guys, from the Rolling Stone magazine cover.
Yeah, it's this Facebook photo that makes him look like a rock star in some people's opinion.
Right. Well, they're very upset about it. But what upsets me about it is the fact that it says there as a caption, bomber.
The bomber.
The bomber. He's the bomber.
Right.
He's been tried and convicted in the media in the same way that Zimmerman has. We have completely lost the whole concept of how a jury works and why you would have a jury. I mean, looking at this is an article that's linked on Drudge right now. The niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that Dr. Martin Luther King would not wear a hoodie. And she did that in reaction to a picture that somebody had photoshopped his face into a picture of a hoodie. And she's talking about the trial there. One of the things that bothers me about this whole thing is that people don't understand why we have juries.
Just remember with the Boston bombers, the alleged Boston bombers, just the days after they captured the younger brothers, like we don't need to inform these guys of their rights. We don't need trials. We don't need this. We don't need that. We just need to convict these guys, execute these guys, throw them in the cellar for the rest of their lives.
That's right. And it used to be that if the media was so irresponsible, we have free speech and we should have free speech, but that doesn't mean that you slander and demonize and libel people, right? And so, when they call somebody, when they talk about people before they've had a trial, they used to always say the alleged bomber, the alleged murderer, the alleged whatever. They don't do that anymore.
No.
Okay? They don't bother with it. And nobody is talking about that. Everybody is talking about how Zokar, the bomber, looks too good on this picture. And CVS says they're not even going, the CVS drugstore chain's not even going to carry the magazine in their stores.
Not because of the content, but because of the image on the cover.
Exactly. That's what people take offense to. I find that amazing. I'm going to be talking in the third hour to someone from the Fully Informed Jury Association. And it's something that most people don't even go for a jury trial anymore. Most of the time they're intimidated by a lot of spurious charges that are piled on by prosecutors. And then they plea bargain to maybe what they would have been charged with in the first place.
Yeah, they overcharge. Which I wish more people would understand this. I don't know any particular examples off the top of my head, but there are examples where you charge somebody with let's say murder, to get them to go for manslaughter. And
it's very, very few trials ever go to a jury anymore. And one of the reasons is because jurors don't know what their rights are, and they usually turn into rubber stamps for the judge. but not in the case of the Zimmerman trial. You know, that was kind of interesting, and I don't know what your take is on it. I mean, we haven't really talked about, everybody's been talking about this, but we haven't really talked about it. To me, it's like one of these things about a self-defense thing that really a jury had to decide. You really couldn't decide that in the media.
Yeah, we talk more about that on the other side.
Yeah, we'll be right back. I'm joined with Jakari Jackson, and I'm David Knight. We'll be right back after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I'm joined here in the studio with Jakari Jackson. We typically work the nightly news for Prison Planet TV, and we're substituting here for Alex Jones today. Now, before we get back to the news, I just want to tell you about one of our sponsors, Infidel Body Armor. That's www.infidelbodyarmor.com. It stops hundreds of rounds from AK-47, M4, 3060, 308, and more. Ceramic armor may stop 6 rounds, but what about the 7th, as they say? This is a great product, and when you support our advertisers, it helps to fund our operation here. So please go to infidelbodyarmor.com. Well, Jakari, talking about body armor, there's a bounty out on Zimmerman's head from the new Black Panthers. I always have to put that new in there to distinguish it. Larry Pinckney always wants to disassociate himself from the new Black Panthers with good reason. So Zimmerman might want to get some of that infidel body armor. Yeah. You know, there's it's amazing to see the double standard here when they're allowed to publicly put out a $10,000 bounty on his head. And yet at the same time, we've got an AP news story here that police are charging a website that hosted a murder video.
Yeah, and
keep
in mind, you know, they don't want him dead or alive. We've seen the T-shirts that says dead or alive, and it has alive scratched out.
And you've got Facebook pages that call for his murder. They don't say anything to them.
Various celebrities tweeting his parents' home address, and I don't even think they were tweeting the correct addresses on those. And you and I remember the time, you know, we've been visited. Just people make a comment about murdering the Bush family or something like that on Planet Infowars,
and they show up at our door. Secret Service. We were both here when they showed up.
People don't believe us when we tell them that story, but we actually had the Secret Service come up. It's around Christmas time this past year, and I was just about to leave to get on the plane to go back to Oklahoma, and the Secret Service comes, knocks on the door, and I believe you answered the door. And
he flashes me the badge. So that badge says Secret Service. Can I come in? I said no. You got some papers to come in? So yeah, we went around and talked around with people, but you know, they don't hesitate to come to the door about a little spurious comment on our website, but somebody takes out an entire Facebook page. They start doing T-shirts. They start putting out dollar bounties to have him killed. They have absolutely no problem with that. That tells you right there what this whole thing is about. That tells you right there this is counterintelligence operation. This is a government operation to pit the races against each other. Nothing could be clearer about that. I mean, and you look at the Black Panthers, how the Department of Justice just passed on doing anything about them turning voters away, threatening voters at polling places in Chicago. We know that the government has used counterintelligence to create groups like the Ku Klux Klan, and groups like the new Black Panthers, and this is absolute proof of it. No other group, unless they were a government COINTELPRO operation, would be allowed to do something like that.
And also I don't know if you want so much to call them an organized group, but all these riots, and I'll call them rioters because they're not protesters. You don't protest by jumping on innocent people's cars in the middle of L.A. and tearing down gates of Walmart. That doesn't seem like a protest to me. But these people are going out, and regardless if they were really actively pursuing justice for Trayvon, you have plenty of people who are just opportunists using it as an excuse to go tear up stuff and go loot people's homes and so forth.
Right. Even if they believe that the jury made the wrong decision, how do you justify pulling out an innocent person who hasn't done anything to anybody? I mean, don't they see the irony of this? They think that Trayvon was singled out for having done nothing at all, and singled out because he was a particular race or appearance or whatever. He was singled out and killed. Well, so then they are going to go out and single out
so they
people?
Drive around and abduct joggers, beat them up, and drop them off someplace, you know, and that's justice for Trayvon.
That's right. Well, that's it for this segment. We're going to be back in the next hour with Stan Lenic. He's the Deputy Sheriff of the Year from the Constitutional Sheriffs and Police Officers Association, and we're going to talk to him about real law enforcement, constitutional law enforcement. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex Jones. We're going to be joined in this next hour by Stan Lenic, Deputy Constitutional Sheriff of the Year. And we're going to talk to him about what it really looks like to be a constitutional sheriff, what it really looks like to respect the rule of law, to respect the Constitution. So we're looking forward to talking to him. Now, we've got some breaking news here. We've got the EPA, according to Cryptagon, is nuking the radiation rules. That's right. If they don't get the kind of results they want, they just disregard the rules. They have now rewritten the rules for what it passes for a safe exposure to radiation, and raising it from the current goal of 1 in 10,000 to 1 in a million Americans. They're going to have fatal cancers, but they have raised this by about a factor of, I think, 1,000 in the article it says here. So if you don't get if they're worried about radiation from Fukushima, then the solution is not to actually address the problem. It's just to change the rules. This is the same EPA that did human testing in order to justify their fine particulate matter regulations. They did human testing feeding diesel exhaust directly into people's aspirators, deliberately searching for people who had respiratory and heart problems so they could create an incident which would justify their regulations, exposing them to levels that were up to 70 times what the EPA had already said would not just make you sick, as EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson said. She clarified this in congressional hearing. She said, this is not just going to make you sick. I'm talking about stuff that will kill you. And so they took that level that they had presumably determined already and fed that at up to 70 times that level to people trying to provoke an incident. So is the EPA really looking after our health, or is it trying to build an empire? Is it trying to find a way to control our economy? Is it trying to find a way to shut down our industry and shut down our power generation? I think it's the latter. We also have some other interesting news here about Monsanto patents getting rejected by the Indian government. Now, you know, Monsanto can get pretty much anything they want in America, but not in India. If you recall, in India, they already had farmers committing suicide by the thousands because they were being sued by Monsanto. Just like the Supreme Court case that the Supreme Court found in 9-0 in favor of Monsanto, that was rejected in India. Because what they said was Monsanto's wheat or corn was cross-pollinating with other farmers' corn and wheat, and they would come around then and look at that and say, we have some genetic material from Monsanto. They would sue them for royalties and essentially destroy these people's lives financially. And the farmers were committing suicide there. But in America, that's okay. In America, we serve the interests of Monsanto. You might remember Clarence Thomas was formerly a lawyer for Monsanto, did not recuse himself from that court decision either. And some other news here. You may have seen the preview for the new movie Elysium that is coming up, and it's a science fiction film. And there's an article today in Wired magazine with the director. And this director is originally from South Africa, and he says that he kind of likes L.A. because it has this thermonuclear weapons feel like it's about to go off at any point. He says L.A. can't quite match the level of intensity of Johannesburg, South Africa, but he says it's getting there. It's getting pretty close. And this takes place, Elysium is set in 2154, where you have this wealthy 1% live in this orbiting satellite, and they have everything provided for them. The rest of the people are brutalized by robots, by robocops, and that's basically where we're headed. And he's perfectly fine with that. He thinks that, so this is maybe some predictive programming and not really complaining about it, but it'll be an interesting film to see. We'll be right back with Stan Lenic, Constitutional Deputy Sheriff of the Year. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex, and we have joining us in this segment, Stan Lenic. Now, if you've seen that video about the opt-out in film campaign where Ashley, Jessica, and Jason Burmis went to an airport and they were trying to hand out some literature, and the airport official took exception to that and tried to bully a police officer into arresting them, throwing them off the property. And there's some video, if you're watching this right now, that is Officer Lenic right there. And he basically mediated this dispute and listened to both sides, and he understood that they were not doing anything in this public place that was against the law. And he stood up for their free speech rights. And then, as a result of that, Officer Lenic was given the award from the Constitutional Sheriffs and Police Officers Association this year. He was given the award of Deputy Sheriff of the Year because that video went pretty viral. A lot of people saw that. Now, he's had law enforcement experience, 6.5 years as a deputy there. And we've got him on the line right now. Officer Lenic, how are you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you for joining us. I've seen that video many times, and I tell you what you did there in that airport is what we all wish the police would do everywhere. Be calm about that and just listen to both sides, make a determination. So many times we see the police just losing it and going out of control. Tell us, how you approach law enforcement. What's your philosophy?
Well, my philosophy is the golden rule: treat others how they treat you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically it. When Ashley, Jessica, and Jason Burmis came to the airport, as I talked to you a little bit earlier about, is they were polite, they were kind, they stood their ground, they knew their rights, and it actually made my job a little easier. When you're dealing with someone who is courteous and they showed me utmost respect, and I really appreciate that.
That's right. That's right. Well, a lot of times we have officers, though, who essentially initiate a conflict. And this is a case, I don't imagine you've seen this. We just had, just south of Austin here is a town called San Marcos. Mm-hmm. And there's an article here, it's actually made national news. San Marcos cop faces a felony rap for assaulting a woman during an illegal arrest. Now, according to the police chief, Howard E. Williams, he said, "I won't prejudge the internal investigation. I haven't heard what the officer has to say yet, and I'll reserve judgment until that happens," he said, "but there are standards, and I think it's fairly obvious that what we think about his conduct that night and that we were the ones that went down and filed the criminal charges. It was actually the police chief who filed the criminal charges after reviewing surveillance camera footage." Mm-hmm. He says, "I believe what he did was criminal." And a Corporal Palermo said that, actually it was a Commander Perry Dunn said that Corporal Palermo, who's the one who's charged, the woman in question did not make contact with the driver or with the police officer. What was happening with this, from what we've been told with the surveillance camera, what the police department has said was, he had pulled somebody over on a stop, and they were over on the side. She walked by. She didn't look at them. She didn't say anything to them. She walked kind of close, and he got confrontational with her and wanted her ID, and she said, "For what? I haven't done anything." Mm-hmm. And it escalated from there. And at one point, the back and forth, she was essentially standing up. She had not done anything wrong, and he was somehow offended because she had walked too close or something. And eventually what he did was he slammed her in the concrete, broke out several of her teeth, and gave her a concussion. And so and I mean, that's how it escalates. And, from our standpoint, from the public standpoint, we're seeing this happen so many times, and we say, why is that apparently more often the case than a situation the way you handled it with Ashley and with Jason? Why is that getting out of control? And what do we do? What kind of systemic controls can we have to watch the watchers, to essentially control that, to make sure that doesn't happen? Do you have any idea about that?
Well, first of all, in any job or profession, there are, bad apples. Mm-hmm. I mean, you see it every day. You see it in the news, and exactly what you just, told me. I did not see the video of it, so I kind of, wish I did before, talking to you about this.
Right. I understand you can't comment on the specifics of it. Yeah.
Right. But, I mean, how far away was she from the traffic stop?
Well, evidently they were right up beside the sidewalk. I haven't seen the video either. I'm just reading the article based on the fact that after the police chief and the police commander reviewed the video, he essentially arrested her. He threw her to the ground and then arrested her. Right. They released her, and then after they reviewed the footage, they charged him with a felony. Right. So this is yet to be determined. So, you know, she wasn't like brushing right up against him, I don't believe, but for some reason he took exception to it. And I guess the question that we all have, you know, we know that when there's a shooting involved, there's always going to be an internal investigation, correct?
Oh, of course.
Okay, but when there's a taser involved or some other form of quote-unquote non-lethal force use, because you don't always have, you know, tasers are not always non-lethal. People die from that sometimes. People have permanent injuries, brain injuries from that when they hit the ground. So I don't believe, now correct me if I'm wrong, are there automatic investigations when non-lethal force like tasers are used?
Well, I can tell you this, and just speaking from experience with my department, anytime use of force is committed, whether it's deployment of a taser or pepper spray or anything like that, the officer involved has to fill out a use of force form. And when he fills that out, he has to state specifics of why he used that force. And it goes directly to the immediate supervisor. And the supervisor reviews that and basically says, okay, he used the appropriate amount of force, you know, and with, you know, all of our traffic stops and everything that pretty much that we deal with, everything is recorded. We have cameras in all our cars, and the supervisor reviews that, and he makes a determination. Now, did he use the appropriate amount of force? Yes or no? If excessive force was used, it goes up the chain to our internal affairs. So, you know, there is definitely, you know, each officer in my department is held accountable for what they do out on the road.
How does that differ from, let's say there's a shooting? How is that different from just the use of force? How's the review of if a firearm is discharged? How is that review process different, or is it different?
It's actually not different because it's the same form that you'd have to fill out. You know, I've never been involved in a shooting. One of my coworkers has, so I can't really specifically, you know, state as to, you know, what exactly happens. You know, I mean, I'm not in a supervisory role, so I can't really, you know,
I understand,
give you specifics on that. But I mean, as far as I know, especially with the shooting that my coworker was involved with, you know, the sheriff himself came out. I mean, all the supervisors were there. The investigation starts right away. I see.
Well, you know, we've had situations where there was a video, perhaps you've seen this one, that this also went viral. A woman is sitting on a curb, handcuffed with her hands behind her, and she's smart-mouthing, obviously, the cop and getting him really annoyed. And he basically does a roundhouse kick to her head.
Yeah, I did see that.
Remember that? And if I remember correctly, I think that the police department, the police chief, fired him, relieved him of duty, and then he was reinstated, I believe, by the police union, got his job back, and fought against that. So, I mean, you know what? You know, we have this situation where we're looking at it was like, well, how do you, the old expression is who watches the watchers? You know, how do we police the police? You know, if there's, like, as you mentioned, there can be bad apples, there can be good apples, but, you know, you have to have some kind of a system, some kind of a systemic check against a bad apple. You know what I'm saying? You can't just, you know, I wish everybody was like you and was level-headed and respected the law, but, you know, when you've got bad cops, I mean, what do we do to correct that? Because we can have corruption inside the police force. I mean, do you have any suggestion about that having been inside?
I wish I had the answer to that, because if I did, you know, I'm sure everybody would be looking to me for advice with that, but I really can't, you know, give a definitive answer as to, you know, I guess what each police officer needs to do is remember their oath of office, remember why they are in law enforcement to begin with, and, you know, it's...
And that brings us to your award from the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. Tell us a little bit about that organization.
I actually had the opportunity to go out to the convention out in Missouri. Sheriff Mack was kind and generous and flew me out there for the convention, and it was very interesting. It was very eye-opening as to things that are going on in this country that, it is just, abuse of government, abuse of the federal government on law-abiding citizens. And, it's actually sickening as to what, things are happening in the federal government.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that's the other big concern, I think, of Americans everywhere. It's not just, a rogue cop and that they can brutalize people and many times get away with it, but it's this systemic corruption that is coming from the militarization of the police and from the central control of the police in Washington. And we're going to talk to you more about that right after the break. We're talking to Stan Lenic, the Deputy Sheriff of the Year from the Constitutional Sheriffs and Police Officers Association. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I'm joined on the phone here with Stan Lenic. He's a police officer from New York, actually a deputy sheriff, and he was given the Deputy Sheriff of the Year award by the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. And he did it for a video that you probably have seen. It went viral. It was Ashley Jessica and Jason Burmis were filming and handing out flyers at the airport in relation to the opt-out and film campaign that was going on this last, I guess it was just before Christmas, was it, guys? That's Officer Lenic, and he basically defended their right to do that against a local airport official who was trying to get him to shove them along. Officer Lenic, I guess one of the things that I found interesting about that was the fact that you had absolutely no problem being videotaped. We see cops go absolutely ballistic and get violent over the fact that somebody's videotaping them, but you had no problem with that. Tell us why.
No, of course not, because the fact of the matter is whenever I'm on a traffic stop and walking around the airport and everything, I'm being videotaped. Everything is audio and videotaped, especially in the patrol car. So, I mean, I have no problem being videotaped.
There seems to be...
I got nothing to hide.
That's the point. That's the point exactly. When I see a cop who gets so upset about being videotaped, it's like, if you're doing your job, if you're doing the right thing, why would you be concerned about that? And that was precisely the point, is that you weren't doing anything that you had to be ashamed of. And we've had court decision after court decision after court decision overturning local regulations, overturning laws, and standing with the fact that citizens have a right to videotape in public. There is no expectation of privacy for anyone if you're walking around in public, especially no expectation of privacy for someone who is a representative of the government, essentially, doing law enforcement, that sort of thing. So I found that very interesting that, as opposed to the officers who will basically get in people's faces and start punching them if they're videotaping, you had no problem doing that because you were not doing anything wrong.
Exactly. And I might add, too, that, several times when I've stopped someone, they pulled out their cellular phone and they videotaped me. And whether they told me if they were doing it or not, I personally really don't care because, like I said, I do everything, every time I do a traffic stop or, what have you, I deal with this. I have, it's kind of like the same speech, and I just do it the same way every single time. And, like I said, I got nothing to hide, and I don't mind being videotaped.
Absolutely. If you're not doing anything wrong, if you're doing the right thing, and if the person is doing the right thing, they're videotaping. Why? For their own protection. You're videotaping for your own protection. You're videotaping out of your car for your own protection. If everybody's doing everything the way they should be doing it in this, and that's the whole point of the opt-out and film campaign. Ashley Jessica was really getting manhandled by the TSA. And once her brother started filming it, they completely changed the way they approached her, the way they, everything that they did completely changed. The point is that they knew they were being filmed, and they knew that this is a film that they were not going to control. That's the other part of it. The police know that they're being filmed, but they believe, in many cases, I think, that they can control that. I've told my family what they need to do. They get pulled over. They need to start filming it, and they need to make sure that it is streaming live to a service like Ustream or something like that, so that even if the police officer takes away the camera or stomps it, as we've seen in many cases, that's already gone up, and it's already preserved up their lives. So they've basically got a record of what's going on for their protection, you know, if the police officer's not going to do that.
Right.
Let me ask you about the practice that is happening in New York City, because you're in, what, upstate New York, is that correct?
Upstate New York, yeah, Albany area, actually the capital of the state.
Well, you know, down in New York City, you know, there's a lot of things that happen down in New York City that are, at this point in time, aberrant behavior. We hope they don't become standard behavior throughout the rest of the country. But one of the things that they're doing is this, just kind of stopping people on the streets and, you know, kind of like the Gestapo, you know, your identity papers, you know, kind of doing a sidewalk audit. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, if you have, as a police officer, if you have no reasonable expectation that criminal activity is afoot, and, you know, you want to talk to somebody, there's nothing that says you can't talk to somebody, but if they don't want to give up their, you know, information or their driver's license, if they're not doing anything wrong, there's really nothing, you know, you can do.
That's right.
You know, if they're not doing anything wrong, let them go. You know, it's simple. Now, I don't know how, you know, New York City's policies and procedures are. They're totally different than the rest of the state.
Hang on a second, Officer Lenic. We're going to come back to that right after the break. We're going to be taking your calls at 800-259-9231 if you want to call and ask some questions to a constitutional deputy sheriff. We'll be right back with Stan Lenic. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Stan Lenic. He's a Constitutional Sheriff and Police Officers Association Deputy Sheriff of the Year. And we're talking to him about what it's like to actually respect the Constitution as a sheriff, as a law officer. Stan, thank you for joining us. And, you know, we were talking just before the break about these kind of these sidewalk, massive I guess sidewalk blocks. They're not road blocks, you know, they're doing in New York City where they're auditing people there. I guess that's one of the things that people are really concerned about, is almost kind of like reverting to a Gestapo type of environment where the police can walk up to you and without any reason that you're breaking a law and start demanding identity papers from you and, you know, various other things like that. You know, how do you feel about that? That's not something that you're doing in your jurisdiction right now, but we're seeing that all the time near the border of our country, not too far from where we are. They've essentially declared it a constitution-free zone where they believe that they can search and frisk you and your car without any reason, kind of like we see the NSA going through people's metadata, going through their actual phone calls and their email messages without any reason for suspicion, without taking it before a judge.
Right. Right. Yeah, I you know, well, like I was telling you before, I mean, you know, any police officer can go up to somebody and, you know, talk to them. You know, like if I go up to somebody, I strike up a conversation, I'm not going to immediately ask, oh, I need your driver's license. You know, sometimes, you know, we're human too. We like, you know, to talk to people, and, you know, people shouldn't feel the fear of talking to us. But, you know, it goes a step further when, you know, you start demanding information when somebody has done nothing wrong.
Right.
You know, and that's where, you know, you're getting yourself into, you know, the police officer himself could be getting himself in trouble by, you know, taking it that step further and not having a reason to, you know, ask somebody for their identification. Exactly.
You know, we've got this competition, this film competition that's going on, Operation Paul Revere. And I was just reviewing one of the films last night. It was called A Drop of Water. People can find that at infowars.com/P or /Paul Revere. One of the things that they were talking about how tyranny had looked under the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, and they had a picture of some signs, and this sign was up in multiple languages, French, English, Cambodian, and in English it says, "The security of regulation." And it has several different steps here. One, you must answer according to my questions. Don't turn them away. Next one is, don't try to hide facts by making pretexts of this or that. You're strictly prohibited to contest me. You must immediately answer my questions without wasting time to reflect. Don't tell me about your immoralities or about the essence of the revolution. In other words, don't appeal to the rule of law. And the last one was, while getting lashes or electrification, you must not cry at all. I I mean, this is not a joke. This is actually what is in Cambodia. This is the kind, this is where tyranny essentially, what it eventually winds up with when you have people who don't respect the rule of law, who don't respect the Constitution. Now, you said that you learned quite a bit when you went to the Constitutional Sheriff's Convention about that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, I just want to comment on that sign. First of all, I feel sorry for the people of Cambodia that they have to deal with this tyranny. Second of all, that's why our Constitution is in place.
Absolutely.
Because our forefathers left a country that was like that. And they came here and they wanted to be free people. And they wrote this precious document to protect themselves from stuff like that. And going and to Missouri to the Constitutional Sheriff's Convention, it was all about, the Constitution, and that is the supreme law of the land.
Absolutely.
All right?
You take an oath to that, right?
From Milwaukee, I remember correctly him saying, God wrote the Constitution, and gave it to us. He wrote the 10 Commandments, and he gave us the Constitution. And you really don't need any other laws than that. I mean, it's
a very dangerous thing when you have, as we began the program, we had quotes from Jimmy Carter. We had quotes from former Senator from New Hampshire, Gordon Humphreys. We had a quote from the former Treasury Department official, Paul Craig Roberts. All of them talking about how illegitimate our government has become because it has separated itself from the Constitution. And once you do that, your government is illegitimate. And it's even more dangerous than that because we see it from the police officer on the street to the occupant of the Oval Office, that when they sever themselves from the Constitution, basically they become dictators. That's literally what dictator means. It means the law is in my mouth. I'm going to dictate to you whatever the law is at this moment. There is no authority higher than me. It's essential that we have a rule of law, that we have something that people swear allegiance to, and that we hold them to that allegiance. We're going to take some calls right now. We've got Chad in Kentucky. Chad, what have you got? Have you got a question for Stan Lenic?
Yeah, I got two kind of questions. The first thing, it's hard for me. It's kind of a hard question to ask, but do you really think that we're still living under the Constitution with people, judges saying that they don't allow the Constitution in court, and people getting arrested for playing with toy guns and stuff like that? Are we really under that, or what's going on here?
Getting arrested for toy guns, that's absolutely ridiculous. What is this country coming to when, you have kids, like when we were kids, we played with toy guns. Nobody got hurt. It's just, we got to draw the line somewhere.
Absolutely. It gets even worse than that, Stan. There was a couple of cases. One kid was eating a Pop-Tart, and because he took some bites out of one side, the other kid said, look, he's making a gun. And they kicked him out of school. They had another kid actually physically arrested by the police. I think he was 8 or 9 years old. Actually physically arrested, handcuffed, and taken away by the police there at the school because he was belching in class.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
There's
no sense of proportion.
We have drug dealers and bad crime in a lot of these cities in our country, and we're worried about if a kid is saying gun in school. Come on, where are our priorities?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's take a question from Robert in California. Robert, you're live on the show.
How are you doing?
Doing good. What's your question?
Okay, I just wanted to bounce an experience off of your guest there about what happened to me. I was in a federal park with a friend of mine on my mountain bike, and ran into this federal park ranger who, like you were saying, he acted like he was just a complete Gestapo, officer towards us. We were on a dirt road, and he says, put your bike over there and get down on the ground.
What were you doing? You were just riding your bike, and he just ordered you to get off of your bike? Were you riding it
off your bike and down on the ground? And
why do you think he did that?
Being an American and being raised to believe that I live in a free society, I said, well, what authority do you have to make me sit on the ground? And that's when he really freaked out, and
was he?
What exactly were the precursors to him coming up to you? That's I guess I need a little bit of elaboration on that.
Yeah, was that an area where you were not allowed to ride a bike or something like that? Were there regulations about not riding a bike in the park, or?
Apparently so on that, but there was no sign posted, and I thought it was a place where you could ride.
I see. So
anyways,
instead of just tell you were concerned about the way that he comported himself towards you, that he would get real hostile immediately in the situation instead of just informing you that you've got to stop.
Yeah,
Okay.
and just to force you down on the ground, because if you just look at world history, who was that person who told you you can sit on the ground and now you can rise? That was a king, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, a king said, when you went to go see the king, you would bow down on the ground, right? Yeah. And then he would say, okay, you can rise now. So, I mean, what I'm saying is all you have to do is get a job with the federal government now, and you're a king. And in America, we were about getting rid of kings.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, and not only that, I look at history, and I mean, you can mouth off to the king back, hundreds of years ago, or the queen. I mean, Anne Boleyn, who was Queen of England, would ride down the street in her carriage, and everyone would shout "whore" at her because she wasn't that popular. And now you can't even blink at a government employee.
Well, I think, Stan, that kind of goes back to respect for the Constitution, what we were just saying, that if you don't have any respect for the Constitution, the rule of law, you can kind of fall in that trap of being a dictator, right?
That's correct.
Power corrupts people, and if you are the law instead of enforcing the law, then basically that is the ultimate corruption. Let's talk to Kevin in Florida. Kevin.
Hey, Mr. Knight. Thank you for taking my call. I just want to say that you and the crew are doing a great job on the nightly news every night, and I love watching it on my Roku.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Lenic, thank you so much for keeping your oath and being a human. We need more of it. I got a question. Let me just give you a little background. I noticed shortly before Fast and Furious was busted that my county PD worked with the ATF in order to create a sting operation using a fake pawn shop to purchase illegal firearms. And they got over 270 stolen firearms and, dirty guns. Also, they infiltrated their own drug culture, even more, and fed the system. The same operation occurred in many other large cities in the same time period, shortly before Fast and Furious. Mr. Lenic and Mr. Knight, do you think that police departments may have helped the ATF find dirty firearms in order to fund the Mexican drug cartels that were supported by Wells Fargo and Wachovia?
I don't know. What do you think, Stan? Got any opinion on that?
I honestly,
we can't really say for sure,
Right. I don't know for sure. I mean, I can't. Especially where I'm at, it's pretty rural. Mm-hmm. I mean, our airport is not really that big. It's called an international airport for the fact that we have one flight to Canada there and back a day. So as far as, what we do here is there's a gentleman by Pastor Muller who works in the city. And what he does is he takes in cooperation with the Albany Police and the Sheriff's Department. It's kind of like a gun buyback. Whether the gun is legal, illegal, whatever. You bring a gun to one of these events, and you're given a $100 gift card to wherever. No questions asked, and it's been very successful. You turn a gun in, and no questions are asked, and and you get a $100 gift card. I think that's a great program.
But don't you think that they're going to turn in a lot of guns that really don't have any value? I mean, if somebody could sell a gun, if it's worth more than $100, don't you think they could sell that somewhere else?
Well, Well, they probably could, but a lot of times, people don't. Nowadays, people don't want guns; they're afraid of guns, and this is a way of getting a gun off the street, or instead of giving it to somebody else, or you get something out of it.
Yeah, it's I guess that could work. I guess concern some people have had is that a lot of times if somebody's got a gun, maybe they got it from a relative who used to know how to use it and wasn't afraid of them. But sometimes they might get those guns if there's no questions asked. It might be a stolen gun. We see many cases where they're putting information out as to the location of gun owners, and that's almost an open invitation for somebody to break in there, steal it. And if there's a program out there where they can just turn it in with no questions asked, that's also a concern I have. Let's go to Ronnie in Texas. Ronnie, are you there?
Thank you, sir. And Deputy Sheriff, I'm asking your opinion. I was attending a public meeting, and I wanted to address an item on the agenda and awaited my turn. And when it was my turn, after taking 3 pages of notes about this very issue, the county judge broke decorum, and before allowing me to ask my question about the $25 million of taxpayer dollars going to a profit-making hospital, he asked me, and only me, he said, "Well, do you have anything relevant to say?" To which I responded, "Please, Judge, stop asking me such idiotic questions." And that was reason enough for him to call over the deputy sheriff, escort me out of the building, ban me for 4 months. They took me out of the building and put me in handcuffs. Luckily, a more mature, knowledgeable sheriff or sheriff deputy stopped them from taking me to jail on that question, but I'm still, to this day, I'm banned from public speaking at a public meeting for what I just described to you. And
well, that's interesting, because
that is interesting.
Judges have, they basically have their own little fiefdom and kingdom, that they operate under, and we're going to be talking about that in the next hour with someone from the Fully Informed Jury Association. But, they have a lot of leeway with what they can do, charging you with contempt issues. But to go that far and ban you from speaking at any public meeting, I don't see what the legal support for that is.
That's against your First Amendment right of freedom of speech.
Yeah, I would think so.
That goes totally against that.
Yeah.
And what right does he have to ban you from speaking in a public place?
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Right.
Let's go to Scott in Iowa. Scott, how you doing?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. What's your question, Scott?
Well, we've seen, I know I've seen quite a handful of videos where a police officer is manhandling or what appears to be an assault on camera, and later on it turns out that that his boss or a prosecutor or somebody actually charged that officer with assault. One video in particular was down in Texas where one officer ran up to another officer who had a guy in handcuffs. The guy in handcuffs wasn't struggling, but he ran up, put a knee in his back, threatened to kill him if he moved, and then was subsequently fired shortly after the fact. My question to you is if you were in that situation and you saw an officer doing something like that that you knew wholeheartedly and within the law was completely and totally uncalled for, would you act on that by, I don't know, maybe arresting them or doing whatever you could to stop them from assaulting that person?
Well, what I would do, of course, is, if the threat is immediate, I'd call and say, hey, back off. He's already in cuffs. Leave him alone, number one. And then I would, I would have to, go to my supervisor and say, hey, look at, this guy's already in cuffs. And I know the guys that I work with, and I know this, I believe this wholeheartedly, that all the guys that I work with would not do such a thing.
We're coming up to a break. We're going to be right back with Stan Lenic, Deputy Sheriff of the Year. Stay tuned. We're going to have more questions for Stan. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex, and we are talking to Stan Lenic, Deputy Sheriff of the Year from the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. And we want to talk to him a little bit about what was discussed at the Constitutional Sheriffs Convention where he got the award. Stan, I've got a question for you. What is it that the public can do to stand with constitutional sheriffs and law enforcement officers? I mean, we've got a situation right now where there's a sheriff in Florida that was deposed and is facing criminal charges because he let someone go that he felt was falsely arrested, and his deputies, I guess, complained to local law enforcement. But what things other than a full-blown conflict like that? What can we do to kind of sort that out? How do we tell who the good guys are when we're voting for sheriff? Because that's an elected position.
Well, yes, of course. Sheriff is an elected position, and I'm sure their opponents or whoever is running against them, if they hold a public forum, a question and answer forum, I think that's an opportune time to pose these questions to your local elected sheriffs.
Now, you said you learned some things. Sorry, you said you learned some things when you went to the convention. Now, the Constitutional Sheriff's Association has a questionnaire as well as some literature that citizens might get and basically take that to their police department or to their sheriff's department and give that to them, right? I guess if they're not receptive of that, that kind of tells you something right there, doesn't it?
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Actually, correct. They have
you can obtain that information through the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. I'm sure you can email Sheriff Mack directly to get that information as well.
All right, absolutely. Okay, let's go to some more calls here. But before we do, I want to tell you about a special that eFoods Direct is running. That's efoodsdirect.com/Alex. The number is 800-409-5633. Right now, for every $329 you spend on food with eFoods Direct, you'll get a free 24-day food supply. It's called the Patriot Pack, plus free shipping. And that's at efoodsdirect.com/Alex or 800-409-5633. We've got Dan from Virginia on the line. Dan, do you have a question for Officer Lenic?
Well, first, like everybody else, congratulations for doing the common sense, honest thing, following the Constitution. It's just like a lot of people I see are intellectualizing about kids with guns, Pop-Tart guns. To me, it's all coming down to conditioning the public, but they're saying all these new laws are for our safety. Now, do you feel that all these new additional laws, like, I understand the common sense of no texting, because a lot of people don't have common sense to drive, let alone text and drive.
Correct.
Do you think a lot of these additional laws, quote-unquote, for our safety, are just giving the police more probable cause to pull people over? And that's number one. Number two, based on Holden, Eric Himmler, I call him, he has the perjury. He hasn't answered yet to Fast and Furious and Benghazi, but yet he's wants to bring additional charges against Zimmerman. What are your feelings towards that? So two things.
First, do you have another question?
No, that's good.
Oh, okay. As far as Holden and wanting to bring additional charges against Zimmerman, I mean, first of all, now you want to put him in double jeopardy, which, according to any court of law, that is illegal. When all these
Dan, I wish we could hear the end of this. I wish we could get those other questions, but we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you who are sticking around right after the break, we're going to be talking about juries. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex, and we were just talking to Stan Lenic, Deputy Sheriff of the Year from the Constitutional Sheriffs and Police Officers Association. And it's really important for us to understand that there are good police officers out there. There are police officers who respect the rule of law, who respect the Constitution, who are not afraid to be videotaped. That was one of the things, I think, when I saw that videotape of Officer Lenic that went viral there in the airport. He was absolutely not afraid to be videotaped. As he said when we were talking to him, if he's not doing anything wrong, that's actually there for his protection. And that's why we as citizens videotape the police in our encounters, is for our protection. And so you should not shy away from doing that. That is your legal right. He recognizes that, as do all officers who really follow the law. Now, we're going to have in the next segment, we're going to be talking to a representative from the Fully Informed Jury Association. And we're going to talk about what goes on in court. We're going to talk about something that actually you can do directly to change this country. Many people don't realize that one of the key things that caused the alcohol prohibition, and we know what a corrupting influence that was. Unfortunately, alcoholism went up, addiction rates went up, violent crime and corruption of the police went up during alcohol prohibition. The same thing that we have seen with drug prohibition. It's not about whether or not alcohol is good for you or bad for you. It's not even about whether the drugs are good or bad for you. It's about what prohibition does, the way it corrupts society, the way it destroys the rule of law, destroys our rights. And so you have certain rights, and that prohibition was ended effectively by a lot of juries who refused to send people to prison for violating alcohol prohibition rules. We've seen the same sort of thing happen in some notable trials about marijuana and some other issues. And so we're going to be talking to Kirsten from the Fully Informed Jury Association about the role of juries, not only what their rights are, but what their duties are. You know, you're there to make sure that justice is done for your fellow man. And I know that when we had the reporters contest, which is how I got here, my video was on Fully Informed Juries. And I was amazed to find, when I talked to people on the street, so many people believed that it was their role as a juror to do what the judge told them to do, because the judge knew better. You know, they had basically turned over their reason and their rational thought and any skepticism to just a blind obedience to authority. And that's why so many of us who are called conspiracy theorists, we're actually conspiracy researchers, we're conspiracy fact finders, because we don't blindly follow everything that the government tells us, because just because someone works for the government doesn't make them an angel. It also doesn't make them an authority figure. If they get outside the rule of law, if they get outside the Constitution, they don't have any authority. They're now a criminal. And we're going to talk about what is told to people in courtrooms by judges, and we're going to be having her coming up in the next segment. Now, one news article that really caught my eye today, excuse me, came from Wired Magazine, and they were talking about this Chinese fellow. His name is Zhao Baoan. And he's a genius, and he's doing some genetics research. This is something that could very easily go into a real nightmare science fiction scenario. But listen to how this Wired Magazine article starts. It says, Zhao Baoan is late for a satanic heavy metal concert. After haggling the doorman down to half price, he pushes into a Beijing bar with a ceiling low enough to punch. He follows a shriek of guitars down a corridor into a mosh pit by strobe lights. It's hot as hell and looks like it too. Men on stage are made up as demons and slashing through a song about damnation. It seems like when you get into eugenics, there's always some kind of a satanic connection, even at this level. And although it may have some beneficial effects, we have to worry about things like Gattaca, if you've ever seen that science fiction movie. But we're going to be right back, and we're going to talk about Fully Informed Juries, so stay tuned. Welcome to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, filling in for Alex, and we're going to be talking about a form of tyranny that is not just over the mind of man, but is creeping over our entire society, and that is the loss of a time-honored tradition of liberty, not even a tradition, really a mechanism of liberty. That's the jury. And we're going to be talking to Kirsten Tynan, who is with the Fully Informed Jury Association. She is trying to inform jurors what their rights are as well as their duties under the law. This is one of the most important things that we have as citizens. It's you got it's been said you've got the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. Well, we don't want to have to use the cartridge box, and the electoral box is really pretty well corrupted. And the jury box is very rarely even being used now. Nearly every trial, everyone who is charged with a crime does a plea bargain rather than going for a jury trial. And so we're going to talk to Kirsten, and we've got her on the line right now. Kirsten, how are you doing?
How are you?
Thank you for joining us. Now, let me tell people a little bit about you. It says on your bio here that your pro-liberty activism began in school while you were studying mechanical engineering. Actually, I'm an engineering student myself. I worked for a while, but not as a mechanical engineer, but as an electrical engineer. So, you know, what did you do as in college when you were starting your activism?
I was a member of a political group, and we did things like we hosted the Million Marijuana March in Tucson, and we hosted debates on campus and things like that. So,
well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I talked this last fall to the New Jersey weed man, who basically, this is a fellow who had medical marijuana exemption in California, and he took a lot of marijuana with him to New Jersey. I think he had something like over a pound of it. It was a huge quantity, so much so that they were charging him with being a dealer. And he decided that he thought he could get hung juries to let him off if he went with fully informed jury association. Of course, a lawyer won't make that kind of a plea. So he represented himself pro se, and in his first trial, he actually put up a placard of the New Jersey Constitution, which says that jurors have a right to judge the law as well as the facts of a case. And in that case, he got a hung jury, even though the judge told him to put it down or he's going to throw him in jail. The next case, the judge was friendly and let him keep that sign up, which is basically just a printed sign of the state constitution. And that's the first judge censored that. The second judge didn't. And in the second trial, he got off by 12-0. He was acquitted.
Mm-hmm. Right, and there are many state constitutions that explicitly discuss jury nullification in one context or another, and yet in virtually no state except for New Hampshire now, a recent development happened last year there, but in virtually no state except New Hampshire will a judge let anyone argue jury nullification directly to the jury, even though, you know, if you look back in America's history, one of our Supreme Court justices was impeached in part because he was trying to deny this right of juries.
That's right. That's right. I think the only U.S. Supreme Court judge to ever be impeached, right? That was one of the articles.
Exactly.
One of the articles of impeachment against the only Supreme Court justice ever impeached was that he did not fully inform the jury. And yet what we have today, and this is why, as we began the show, we were talking about how Jimmy Carter says we're no longer a democracy. We've got Senator Gordon Humphrey saying that Ed Snowden has exposed unconstitutional, illegitimate functions of government, and what he's concerned about is that nobody is talking about punishing the people who are doing this. And then we have Paul Craig Roberts, who is one of the chief economists for Ronald Reagan, saying that our government is no longer legitimate because why? It doesn't follow the Constitution. And it doesn't follow the traditions that are behind all of this. It's very, very disturbing when we see first of all, most people are not bothering to get jury trials because the juries have become such rubber stamps for the judges because they basically lie to them about their rights and their duties.
Right. Even in New Hampshire last year passed a statute stating that the defense must be allowed to argue jury nullification to the jury, and this was invoked in the case of Doug Darrell, a religious marijuana user, and he actually won his case. But in a more recent case, that of Rich Paul, the defense argued jury nullification. The prosecutor in the closing statement acknowledged the right of jury nullification, but discouraged the jury from using it. And then the judge went ahead and use the standard spiel that judges give juries, telling them that you must follow the law as I have given it to you. So that case is now in appeal, and I think part of the grounds for that may relate to jury instructions.
Now, that's the key thing, like you said, that even though they've had this law recently passed in New Hampshire, what that law said was that the judge could not punish anybody for bringing up jury nullification. But it didn't mandate that they actually tell them what the law is. They could actually, it allows judges to essentially lie to the jurors.
It's not clear that it allows judges to lie to the jurors. I think that will be something that will have to be hashed out in court. But I think there's good reason to think that that is not what the law says. It doesn't, if you read the law, it doesn't specifically state anything about what the judge is or is not to do. It's specifically addressing what the defense must be permitted to do. So
Right, exactly. But we have these cases in virtually all courts now where the judge tells them, you must do what I say. And in most cases, he'll tell them that they're not allowed to judge the law. They only have to, they're only allowed to look at the facts of the case. And that simply is not true. That's not true from our historical background, and it is not true from the letter of the law.
That is actually totally incorrect what the judges tell people. If you look at one of the earliest Supreme Court cases in United States history, our first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay, in fact, explicitly stated that it was a right of jurors to interpret the law as well as the facts. He said that judges are assumed to be the better interpreters, but it is in fact the right of juries to do their own interpretation if they see fit. And that has never been overturned. There was a court case, a Supreme Court case, which ruled that judges no longer had to inform jurors of their rights and responsibilities, but it did not overturn that right. So by simply not informing them, it used to be as commonly understood that jurors could refuse to enforce unjust laws as it's understood today that we're going to get called for jury duty. It was just a part of the culture. But once that was ruled that judges no longer had to inform jurors of that, it kind of fell out of common knowledge. And so what the Fully Informed Jury Association does is try to document and spread the history of that, where it comes from. It's rooted in English common law.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That goes back, most people have heard of William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, a Quaker.
Right.
And really it kind of goes back to his trial back in England, where he was arrested because they had a law that was said that they didn't have freedom of religion, basically, and so they told him that they could not meet as Quakers. They violated that law as a matter of conscience, and they met and they actually chain locked the church house building. So they met on the steps. They arrested him. It was a clear violation of the law, yet the jury let him go. Mm-hmm. And
exactly.
It established habeas corpus, which says, show us that we actually what they did was they tried. The judge was so outraged that he locked up the chief foreman of the jury, Edward Bushnell, locked him up for quite a period of time, and he was eventually let go by habeas corpus, where people said, show us the law that the foreman broke when he allowed him to go, and they didn't have a law. And so they established habeas corpus as well as the right of jury nullification in that trial.
Right, as well as freedom of religion and freedom of speech.
Yes.
And that juror wasn't just locked up. He was denied food and water. I mean, that guy really was essentially, it was torture of the day, and still stuck to his guns. And so that's something that I wish people would really take to heart, because so many times I get calls in the office from someone who will say things like, well, I didn't want to vote guilty, but everyone else was, and I felt pressured. Mm-hmm. Well, buck up. You need to have a backbone.
Absolutely. We have to watch each other's backs, and that was something that was explicitly said by Patrick Henry and others. They said that, the only way this is going to work is if we cover each other's backs, essentially, to paraphrase what he said. If we cover each other's backs when we are, in a trial, when the government brings something against us. We talk all the time about laws that are absolutely absurd, laws that are unconstitutional, laws that are unjustifiable, unlawful, and yet where it can actually be stopped. We don't have to beg for our political leaders to do some of these things. We can refuse to send our fellow citizens to jail, and yet we have the highest percentage of people incarcerated of any country in the world. We have more people, actually in absolute numbers, than China, with a population many times ours. We have more people in jail than communist China does. So we basically don't have juries who are standing up, who are seeing that justice is done for them. And as I said in a report that I did in a Man on the Street, I was absolutely amazed to have people argue with me that, no, you have to do what the judge says. You shouldn't seek justice for your fellow citizen. You should just do what the judge says.
And in fact, I'm actually encouraged because we have recently had several cases that have been very public where jurors have in fact refused to convict. And you can see, look at them. The jurors aren't getting in trouble. It's very clear that they're doing it. Let's take the case of Jeff Olson in San Diego from a week or two ago.
Well, let's cover that case right after we get back from break, because I want people to call in and talk to us. We're going to clear the lines from the people who have called to talk to the deputy sheriff, but we're going to take your calls at 800-259-9231. And we especially want to talk to anybody that's a lawyer. We won't identify who you are. You can give us a false name and tell us what you think about jury nullification. And we're going to be taking those calls, and we're going to talk about some current events right after the break. You're here with Kirsten Tynan of the Fully Informed Jury Association. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Kirsten Tynan with Fully Informed Jury Associations, and we're talking about how vitally important juries are to our liberties as well as to a functioning society. But, you know, during the break, I was just having a little bit of the new Tangy Tangerine 2.0. It's got a great peach flavor. It's really good stuff. And one of the things that's changed about this is now made with certified organic ingredients, all non-GMO ingredients. It's got over 8,000 ORAC, that's oxygen radical absorbance capacity, that looks at how effective it is at absorbing free radicals in your system. And you can get that at 888-789-9277. So call that number. I think you'll really like Beyond Tangy Tangerine 2.0. Keeps getting better. Better tasting and better stuff in it. Now, just before the break, Kirsten, you were telling us about you were beginning to tell us about some current cases that involved fully informed juries.
Yes, and I just want to mention everyone can go look on our website, FIJA.org, for more information about each of these. The most recent one that I'm aware of is the case of Jeff Olson in San Diego, who was outside of Bank America on a public sidewalk and in chalk, you know, the stuff that washes off when it rains, right, or someone walks on it, wrote some, you know, political statements on the sidewalk, and was eventually charged with 13 counts of vandalism for that, putting him at risk of a maximum penalty of $13,000 fine and 13 years in jail. This is what the city attorney thought was appropriate to charge him with, and offered him a plea deal that he turned down. He wanted to take it before a jury, and good for him for doing that, because the jury acquitted him on all 13 charges. And what was especially funny about this case was that while it was going on inside the courthouse, police had chalked off an area on the sidewalk outside where they were permitting people to chalk messages in his defense, and that was not considered vandalism. It was a clear case of selective enforcement.
It's just amazing. It's just amazing how absurd the laws have become, you know, because we've cut ourselves loose from, you know, the Constitution, from basically, you know, these rational boundaries. And when you don't have boundaries like that, anything can happen. I mean, that's absolutely insane. We've covered that with InfoWars. That's truly amazing. The key thing being that he went to a jury trial, because, you know, when you've got really absurd laws like that, you need to go before a jury. But quite often, jurors don't really understand what their rights are. So that's what you're trying to do. And what do you do with FIJA to educate people? I know that whenever they buy anything from InfoWars, we always have these little pocket constitutions that we put in every order. And part of that is not just the Constitution, but it talks in that little booklet that we put in there. It talks a lot about juries and the importance of juries and your right to judge the law as well as the facts of the case.
Exactly. Well, we publish a variety of literature, and anyone can request a free jury power information kit from us by calling us at 1-800-TELJURY, 1-800-TELL-JURY. And that same literature that you'll receive in there, we have activists across the country distributing at courthouses, at festivals, at community meetings. We have people who speak across the country, do all sorts of outreach. And so we also celebrate, since you mentioned the William Penn case, we're getting ready for September 5th, which is Jury Rights Day, in commemoration of that case. And on Jury Rights Day, we have people out all across the country doing all kinds of community events. We have banners that people will hold outside. We've had people march in parades with our banners and give out information at tables at county fairs around that time, because it's around Labor Day. So we have a lot of different ways, and we invite everyone to visit us at FIJA.org to find out how they can get involved and volunteer if they'd be interested.
That's great. Yeah, it really is an educational effort at this point, because people have been so hoodwinked and lied to about their rights. It's one of the reasons this is the Citizens Rule Book that we put in every order that we send out. And if you look at this right at the very front of it, even before it gets into the Constitution, it talks about jury rights. The jury has a right to judge both the law as well as the facts of the case in controversy. That's from our first Chief Justice, John Jay. Over and over again, as you mentioned, it's a tradition that has been reinforced by chief justices, by history, by the law itself. Many state constitutions have that written into the law. Let's take some calls from people about this issue. We've got Tyler in Oklahoma. Tyler, what's your question?
Hello?
Yes. What's your question, Tyler?
It was more of a suggestion. You're talking about the importance of a jury trial. Well, it goes to, traffic court, especially here in Oklahoma. It's a criminal offense, and they changed the Sixth Amendment into where unless there's 6 months in prison or $1,500 in fines, you don't have the right to a trial by jury.
Wow.
Therefore, it becomes a bench trial. And so you don't have a chance to win in a bench trial because the state is prosecuting you, the state is testifying against you, and the state is judging you. My suggestion would be us try to get the Sixth Amendment changed back. Because
hang on. We'll get to you right after the break. We'll be right back. We're taking calls about juries. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex today, and our guest is Kirsten Tynan, and we're talking about juries, about their rights and their duties. Juries are there to watch your back, and if you're ever fortunate enough to be on a jury, you need to watch the other person's back. You need to make sure that the laws are really just laws, that they're constitutional laws and that they're also just laws, and that's what juries are there for. Now, we were just talking we had a caller on the line, Tyler from Oklahoma, and he was telling us, Tyler, you were telling us that they have basically done away with juries in Oklahoma unless it's over a certain amount of money. Is that correct?
Yes. The Sixth Amendment was changed, I believe it's everywhere, is that unless there's 6 months in prison or $1,500 in fines, you don't have a right to a trial by jury. So therefore, in traffic violations, they'll give you a $250 ticket, and it doesn't make sense to go hire an attorney for $1,000 to $1,500 to represent you. So of course, you're just going to plead guilty, and it's just created a monopoly and a sheep line.
That's right. That's right.
My issue is, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
My issue is I think if we get the Sixth Amendment changed to where we don't have that restriction and we would have juries, we would be able to have the opportunity to present cases such as, the right to travel. There's been several U.S. Supreme Court cases saying that you have the right to travel. And, of course, you're never going to win that type of case in a bench trial. So if you had a jury actually reading cases such as the right of a citizen to travel upon public highways and to transport his property thereon either by carriage or by automobile is not a mere privilege which a city may prohibit, permit at will, but a common law right which he has under the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thompson versus Smith. If they were to read stuff like that, they would wake up and realize that the government has conditioned us, starting off with such things as driver's license, marriage license, hunting license.
Well, and it's broader. It's broader than that, Tyler, because we have situations like the IRS has their own tax court, right, which is an administrative court. It's not really a constitutional court. You've got the EPA has its own court. So in many of these cases, you have these created entities that write their own law as regulators. They enforce their own law, and they judge with a panel, like you said, a bench trial without juries. They judge whether or not you're in violation of that law. What do you think about that, Kirsten?
Well, I have good news. The Sixth Amendment has not been changed. The bad news is that it is being disregarded. So changing it back is not going to help because it hasn't been changed in the first place. It still states that in all criminal prosecutions, you have the right to a trial by jury.
That's right.
It's simply being ignored.
That's right. And if they have a law that says, the Sixth Amendment doesn't apply unless it's over a certain amount, that has no more effect than if they say, well, if you're within 100 miles of the border, that's a Constitution-free zone. I mean, they don't have the authority, and neither actually does the Supreme Court have the authority to amend the Constitution. There's a very specific process for where the Constitution is amended, and it isn't done by fiat of some state legislature or even by the Congress.
And one tactic that I want to mention that is similar to what the caller was talking about is that in the state of Oregon, there is a situation that I became aware of last year where dozens and dozens of Occupy protesters have been arrested and treated like criminals. They were handcuffed. They were taken to jail. They were held. Then once the public spectacle was over and it became clear that was going to be a big problem in the court system, the district attorney decided to drop the charges to the level of essentially a traffic ticket. And so they started getting bench trials for things for which they had been treated as criminals. Well, a non-related case was going through the appeals court in Oregon at the time, and it was ruled that these defendants you couldn't do this bait and switch on these defendants. They were to be given the right to trial by jury. And last I checked, that's still being argued, but it was a question of whether or not they were going to get jury trials, whether or not all the charges were just going to be dropped because it was clogging the courts, or whether the district attorney, I guess in that case, was going to appeal the charges. So, but it's a very common tactic that they will treat you as a criminal when they're arresting you, when they're jailing you before you get to court. But once you get to court, they want to change the rules so it's more favorable for them in court.
Well, you know, and as people are listening to this, they're thinking maybe, well, you know, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I would never do anything to offend the government or whatever. Let's remind people that it wasn't, it was just a couple of months ago that we had a fellow on a beach release 3 or 4 heart-shaped balloons as part of a anniversary or proposal. It was something like that. And he was charged with multiple felonies because each release of a balloon was considered to be a felony.
Right.
You never know when you're going to be swooped up by the police state that's here. And there's the article right there we've got up there. Man faces 5 years in prison for releasing balloons on the beach as a romantic gesture. You never know when you're going to be swept up by these insane laws, and you need a jury of people who have a mind and a backbone to stand up for you against these ridiculous laws, and you need to stand up for other people as well.
And let me tell you what's going on there. We are seeing a huge trend in this country of prosecutors overcharging people, just increasingly excessively, because what they want to, they don't want a jury trial. They don't want you to go to a jury trial. They want you to take a plea deal. So they will charge you with something that is ridiculously excessive, and then they will offer you the carrot of you can get off with a slap on the wrist kind of thing. And what I like to tell people is that if the prosecutor is willing to settle for, I don't know, a fine or community service, but if you go to jury trial, they want to nail you for 80 years, and that is an actual case, then what is the math there? The math is that your right to trial by jury, they're charging you 80 years of your life to exercise that. That's what they're doing. The difference between what they're willing to settle for in court and what they're willing to settle for if you simply knuckle under to petty authority, that is the price you're paying for a jury trial. And that is disrespecting our right to jury trial. It's using it against us if we exercise it.
You're better off to represent yourself pro se than to give in to that kind of stuff like that. I mean, you know, and go for a fully informed jury plea, just like the New Jersey weed man said. You know, in that first trial where he got over half of the jurors to let him go, he said he put up the law from the New Jersey Constitution, even though the judge threatened him and made him take it down right away, threatened him with contempt and was going to throw him in jail. He said it was too late. The information was already out there. You know, one of the things that this Citizens Rule Book says, it says the only power the judge has over the jury is their ignorance. That's what we're trying to cure here with a fully informed jury association. We're trying to inform people about what their rights and their duties are as jurors. We've got a caller here, Cletus in California. Cletus, do you have a question for us? Hello, Cletus? Are you there? Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Clay in North Carolina.
Hi, David. Hi, Kirsten.
Hi.
Hi. What's your question, Clay?
Boy, what you folks are saying here, there's so many things that's running through my mind. The main thing, though, that the comment I had was the emphasis also needs to be just as much on grand juries as petit juries. This is the way we fight overzealous prosecutors to dovetail on what you were just talking about.
Right, and we actually do deal with grand juries as well. I just got an email last night from someone who is actually on a grand jury asking for information on what grand juries are all about. He said, it seems like all we're doing is rubber stamping what the prosecution hands us, and I'm not sure that's what we're supposed to be doing. So hopefully we will get him straightened out. But in fact, grand juries are meant to be a barrier between government and the defendant. It's supposed to be a hurdle that they have to overcome in order to charge someone. It's not supposed to be this rubber stamp ham sandwich situation that we're also familiar with.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're seeing that rubber stamp happen at all levels. You know, it's just the grand jury is particularly notable about that. Maureen in Virginia. Maureen, have you got a question for us?
Actually, what you were just talking about, when I was in Charleston, South Carolina, I was I found out who the chairman of the grand jury was. I had to sneak into the grand jury behind the prosecutor's back. And when I was there, I saw a cop come in and hand the woman in charge 2 stacks. One, he said, true bill this stack. The other one, he said, no bill this stack. And she came over to me. She says, I'll just be a few minutes. And I'm thinking, yeah, right, it's going to take hours. But within a couple minutes, she brought them out. True bill this stack, no bill this stack. They don't even have 5
Not even reading them.
to read any of them. But that's not why I called. I called because, unfortunately, I called because I wanted to know if both the sheriff and the prosecutor are involved in criminal activity. How in the world can you get that stopped with a jury, especially when the grand jury thing is a scam and the people basically have to come in. If they don't come in to be on the grand jury, they are arrested, and they have to stay there until they true bill or no bill the stack, and they're not allowed to investigate anything. How do you get around that?
Mm-hmm. That's a pretty complex question. There's not much that a jury can do in terms of getting rid of a sheriff or a judge who is corrupt if that doesn't end up in court. That's not something that a jury can do. But what a jury can do is refuse to check their conscience at the courthouse door and refuse to enforce the things that such a government agent as a corrupt judge or a corrupt sheriff is trying to push. Simply vote not guilty. And what I encourage people to do is to keep their mouth shut about jury nullification once they get to the courthouse, because if it becomes clear at any point that you are aware of your full authority as a juror to refuse to enforce unjust laws, you can be excluded during voir dire, or you can even be removed during deliberations.
Absolutely.
What you cannot be removed from a jury for is for expressing doubt about a juror's guilt. So I suggest not trying to convince anyone else on the jury to nullify. Simply vote not guilty. Stick to your not guilty vote. Hang the jury if you have to. A hung jury is okay. It's much better for a defendant to have a hung jury than to have a guilty vote against them that they have to appeal. So what I tell people is show up, get on the jury, stand up for what is right, and then shut up. Just don't discuss jury nullification unless you're sure, like in New Hampshire, that's a different situation. If you're sure that everyone else is kind of on board with that already, that's one thing. But don't try and do a 12 Angry Men scenario where you're the one lone juror convincing everyone else that jury nullification is the way to go, because as exciting and dramatic as that seems, it's not likely to play out that way in real life.
And that's a real important point to make there, Kristen. I'm glad you brought that up, because at any point, you can get, you come in there as a juror, the defense or the prosecutor can throw you out for any reason, and the judge can take you off if you're in jury deliberations and you start talking about jury nullification. He can remove you at that point, because they always have jurors and they always have alternate jurors. So the point that Kristen just made is very, very important. Inform yourself, inform other people outside of the trial, but once you're there in a courtroom situation, keep your mouth shut about jury nullification. Focus on it. Talk about your objections, to what's going on. Even if it was clear that the person violated the law, but like it was in the case of the New Jersey weed man, it's clear that he violated the law. There was no question about that. And he didn't deny that he had that quantity of marijuana with him. But he was made that case specifically about jury nullification. But once you're there, even if you're going to nullify it because you disagree with the law, you can still say that you find issues with the court's case, and you can hang the jury. If you hang tough, eventually they'll have to just declare that it's a hung jury and go. But if you tell people that you're there to nullify the law, they're going to remove you in most cases. Let's go to Bill in California. Bill, you have a question?
Happy to see you there. It's nice to have a sane man at the microphone. A little humor here. We have a district attorney who's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and he arrested a woman for passing out FIJA information on the courthouse steps. He called it jury tampering. Well, then he hemmed and hawed, and about 6 months later, it finally dawns on him that the only way to prosecute this case is to show the jury the literature she was passing out. And Yes, we
Catch-22, right?
One thing I'll say about that is that people are starting to figure out that if they go for a bench trial of some sort, then they can get around the jury in that case. But it is in fact not jury tampering to hand out our literature. Our literature discusses no cases. We as an organization advocate neither for nor against any case in progress. We are simply doing general juror education outreach. And so what we encourage activists to do to try and help protect themselves from these inaccurate kinds of charges is not to do this in conjunction with any sort of court case advocacy. Just do it as a standalone effort. And if there is a case that is of particular interest in the community at the time, I suggest going out a few weeks in advance and go out every Monday or, whatever, once a week in advance to establish yourself as part of the landscape and establish that you are not there advocating for or against that case. You're simply doing general juror education outreach. But do be aware that in some cases, if there's an order from the court or something of that nature, they may harass you in a way that does not get you before a jury. So
that's right. Yeah, Julian Heiklund that I talked to, he has a video of some officers coming out of a court and trying to entrap him by saying, tell me what you're doing here. Why are you doing this? And and he basically handed him the literature and said, here, read it for yourself. It speaks for itself. All he would say is, here, it speaks for itself. You're safe as long as you do that. They can't charge you with jury tampering if you're handing out general literature talking about the rights of jurors and not specifically mentioning any case. Right?
That's semi-true. They can charge you.
Oh yeah, they can charge you with anything, but then they have to.
It'll be hard to make it stick.
Exactly. Then they have to say why. They have to show, as the caller said.
Yeah, the thing is, they're certainly not supposed to charge you, but what following the law is apparently a very challenging thing for law enforcement officers.
Well, I mean, they're still charging people for videotaping officers in public, even though there have been court case after court case after court case, and people keep winning judgments. Yeah, they still do it. So yeah, they can do anything they want, but at some point, and that's what we're talking about. At some point, if the jurors are informed, they're going to stand behind you. Mark in Florida, do you have a question for Kirsten?
Oh, yes, I do. And I'd like to tag along on the last caller. You can file bar grievance against every attorney. Bargrievance.net will help. Eddie Craig was on the radio show. You can get to the grand jury and file a complaint just like the prosecutor would. Learn how to do the paperwork. A gentleman was jailed in Florida for handing out FIJA, and I was wondering if FIJA has a habeas corpus template or something to help get these people out of jail because they are falsely accused, falsely charged, and once they can get out, then they can file the complaints against the officers that are locking them up.
Hang on, we're going to get the answer for that question. Hang on right after the break, and Kirsten Tynan from FIJA is going to tell us about that right after the break. So stay tuned and find out the answer. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight filling in for Alex, and our guest today is Kirsten Tynan with the Fully Informed Jury Association. We're talking about your rights and your duties as a juror. And just as we got Dr. Who there, yes, we've taken some time travel here. We've talked about the tradition of fully informed juries, as well as the legal rights of fully informed jurors. And whenever you order anything from InfoWarsStore.com, you're going to get one of these citizen rule books. And it is not just a citizen rule book of the Constitution. It actually says it's got the Bill of Rights and a jury handbook. And I like this little tag here that's on the cover. It says, the fireworks are in the document. That's right. They're not just something we shoot off on the 4th of July. And inside there, you're going to find one of the first things you come across is about jurors. And it says the only power the judge has over the jury is their ignorance. And we're trying to end that ignorance by informing people of what their rights and duties are. And we've got Kirsten Tynan, as I mentioned, from FIJA.org on the line. And we just had a caller ask you about if you're doing a literature handout on the courthouse steps and they decide to unlawfully charge you, do you have an information packet that helps with that?
We actually have guidelines for activists to avoid getting arrested in the first place.
That's even better.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want anyone getting arrested. That plays right into the hands of the government. It's a script that's been written by the government, and they know how to act that out very well. So in the case in Florida, where there was an order not to hand out a certain literature, we actually were in the process of challenging that civilly when it was violated. And unfortunately, once someone got arrested and it was reported in the news that they were associated with us, our court challenge was thrown out of court, which was unfortunate. We had pro bono representation from the ACLU and from the Walters First Amendment Law Group down in Florida. But we have elsewhere in Florida been very successful. We had an activist who did indeed assert his rights and go through the process without getting arrested to insist upon those rights. And there's now a memo on our website from David B. Eddy, administrative judge of the Circuit Court, 5th Judicial Circuit, State of Florida, that states, and I quote, "Based on principles of free speech, I believe that whoever is distributing the handouts in question has a right to do so. Accordingly, I see no reason why the handouts must be excluded from the jury assembly room. I believe we may trust jurors to follow the law as instructed by the judge." Right. So this person obviously disagrees with jury nullification, but he has stated it's perfectly, within our rights to distribute that. And without anyone getting arrested, we have a memo from this judge in that district. So,
well, that's great. That's the important thing, is that you get the word out, that we establish a legal precedence, that we don't have the bad publicity that somebody got arrested for exercising their constitutional rights. But again, I would remind people that, just as we occasionally have police jurisdictions where they arrest people for videotaping, that is your right. And if you don't exercise your rights, you will lose them through apathy, through non-use. And so it is important that you stand up, even though there may be some consequences for it, but it is not illegal.
Right. And you definitely can insist upon your rights in a way that is not going to put you at as much risk as in the case where the arrest happened in Florida. That individual didn't even get a jury trial. That is a huge risk. He not only lost his freedom for that amount of time, but he lost income, and all of that. Yeah. Whereas,
Kirsten, just before we had you, we had Stan Lenic, who is the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association Deputy Sheriff of the Year. And one of the things he said was, it's the way you interact with the police. Sometimes you can defuse a confrontational issue like that just by being wise about what you say. And that's where your materials that you have at FIJA come in. They not only educate people, but they show them how to do it. We're out of time. Thank you so much for talking to us and explaining that to us. And we want to keep up on this, and it's an information war. We want to inform people of what their rights and their duties are. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kirsten Tynan.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow at 11 Central.